You ever pick up a Bible and just wonder where it came from? I mean, it's not just one book, right? It's a whole library. So who put it together? And maybe the biggest question, can we really trust that the words we read today are the same words written down thousands of years ago? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into.
Okay, let's dive into this wild story of two accidental discoveries that really shook things up. So what if two jars just sitting in the desert could answer one of history's biggest questions? And that question is a big one. Is the Bible history, or is it basically a myth? It's a tale of two jars. One seemed to threaten the Bible, the other to confirm it. So let's start with jar number one. The story begins in Egypt, 1945, with a real shocker. A farmer just digging for fertilizer stumbles on a sealed jar. Inside, a bunch of ancient books. One book in particular really grabbed everyone's attention, the so-called Gospel of Thomas. Now this thing was totally different. No story, no crucifixion, just a list of 114 secret sayings. So people immediately started asking, had the original story of Jesus been covered up? But when scholars actually dug into the text, the facts started telling a different story. First off, the ideas in it were, well, weird. Not Jewish, but something called Gnosticism. So what's that? It's this belief that you get salvation from secret knowledge, or gnosis, not faith or resurrection. And here's the big thing. The text itself is from around 150 AD. That's a century after Jesus. It also clearly borrows stuff from Matthew and Luke, so it couldn't possibly be the original, right? So this wasn't some original suppressed version. It was a later group with unorthodox ideas claiming to be Christian. All right, now on to the second jar. This one was found just 2 years later in a completely different desert. This time, it was a shepherd near the Dead Sea. He was looking for a flock, found some caves, and inside were the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of them was a total game changer, the Great Isaiah Scroll. Now, why is this scroll so important? Well, it closed a massive gap in history, over 1,000 years. See, our oldest copy of Isaiah was from around 1000 AD. This new one, it was from 125 BC. So the million-dollar question, what happened when they compared the two copies 1,000 years apart? The verdict? They were practically identical. The message, the prophecies, nothing significant had changed at all. So you see the difference, right? One text was late, speculative. The other was super early and incredibly stable. It shows the Bible wasn't just hidden away. It was copied and passed down, surviving everything thrown at it. So when those two jars were finally opened, it wasn't the new flashy text that held up. It was the one we had all along.
How do we know that the books that ended up in our Bible are the right ones? And that right there is the mystery we're going to tackle today.
All right, so first things first. Before we can even get into which books belong and which ones don't, we have to ask an even more basic question. The copies of the Bible that we have, are they any good? I mean, can we trust that they haven't been changed over time?
You've probably heard the argument before, right? It's like that game of telephone you played as a kid. One person whispers a message, and by the time it gets to the end of the line, it's totally different. A lot of people think that's what happened to the Bible, that it got corrupted over centuries of being copied by hand. It's a really compelling idea, but is it actually true?
Well, when you look at the evidence, a completely different picture emerges. Just for the New Testament, we have, get this, over 5,800 ancient Greek manuscripts. Now, to put that number into perspective, for famous works by Plato or Caesar, we might have like 10 or 20 copies. So 5,800? That's not just a lot. It's an absolute mountain of evidence.
And here's the counterintuitive part. Having more copies is actually a good thing. It's not like the telephone game at all. It's more like putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle. If you only have 10 pieces, you've got no idea what the picture is. But if you have thousands of pieces, even if a few are from the wrong box, the overall picture becomes crystal clear. Those few oddities, the copyist mistakes, they stick out like a sore thumb.
And look, this isn't just a faith-based claim. This is a point of agreement even among skeptics. Take Bart Ehrman. He's a famous New Testament scholar, and he's an agnostic. But even he says that the vast majority of the differences in these manuscripts are things like typos, and that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected. That's huge. So, what's the takeaway here? The text of the New Testament is rock solid. We can be incredibly confident that the Bible you might have on your shelf is what the earliest Christians were reading. Which, of course, brings us right back to that other big question.
Okay, the copies are good. Check. But who decided which books to copy in the first place? How do we get Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and not the Gospel of Thomas?
Yeah, there's a really popular story out there. You've probably seen it in the movie or read it in a book. The idea is that the Roman Emperor Constantine got all the bishops together in 325 AD at the Council of Nicea, and they basically had a big vote to decide which books were in and which were out. It's a great story, super dramatic. There's just one tiny problem with it. It's completely made up. It never happened. We actually have the minutes from that meeting. And you know what they talked about? A huge, knockdown, drag-out fight about whether Jesus was divine. You know what they didn't talk about? The Bible. The topic of which books belonged never even came up.
So, if it wasn't some big conspiracy vote, then how did it happen? Well, the early church communities had a sort of informal checklist for authenticity. You can see the difference really clearly here. The Gospels that made it in, they all date back to the 1st century, and they're all connected to the apostles or people who knew the eyewitnesses. But those other Gnostic Gospels, they pop up way later, 2nd, 3rd, even 4th century. The authors are anonymous, and they're not about history, they're about secret sayings.
And here's a really cool piece of evidence that I love. Think of it like a historical fingerprint. Scholars looked at the popularity of names in different places and times, and what they found is fascinating. The names you see in the New Testament Gospels, Simon, Joseph, Judas, these were super common, top 10 names in 1st century Palestine. But the names in those later Gospels, they don't match. They reflect naming trends from other places, like 2nd century Egypt.
It might seem like a small thing, but it's huge. It shows that the people who wrote the biblical Gospels actually knew the world they were writing about. They lived in it. The details are right. It's that kind of stuff that screams authenticity. Okay, so this brings us to the most important idea of all, the last piece of the puzzle. If there wasn't a big council vote, what did the church actually do in this whole process? It comes down to 2 words: recognition, not creation. This is probably the key takeaway. The church didn't give these books their authority. They didn't create a holy book. They simply recognized the authority that was already there. I love this analogy. Sir Isaac Newton didn't create gravity, right? He just recognized it and described it. That's how the early church viewed these scriptures.
And that's actually what the word canon means. It comes from a Greek word, kanon, which just means a measuring stick or a standard. So the canon wasn't a list of books the church approved of. It was the measuring stick they used to define their own faith and life. It was the standard they submitted to.
From their perspective, the reason they could do this was pretty straightforward. They believed what Jesus said in the Gospel of John, "My sheep hear my voice." They were convinced that they could recognize the authentic voice of Jesus speaking through his apostles in these specific texts.
Okay, let's wrap this all up. Let's pull all these pieces together and give a final verdict on why you can trust this book.
So what have we seen? We've got books that come from eyewitnesses. We have a text that was preserved with incredible accuracy, backed by thousands of copies. We have a collection of books that wasn't forced on people by some emperor but was recognized naturally, from the ground up. And it's all anchored in real history and culture that we can actually check. So the bottom line is this: the Bible you can read today isn't some medieval invention. It stands in a clear, demonstrable, unbroken line all the way back to the very first followers of Jesus. And that leaves us with one last question. And this one isn't for historians or scholars to answer. It's for you. If the story this book tells really is this reliable, if it's this well preserved, then what does that mean for you today?